Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Hi, I'm Chris Steyerwalt.
And I'm Eliana Johnson.
Welcome to Ink-Stained Wretches, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right with the American news media. Eliana Johnson, I can only describe today's conditions as British. It is wet. It is damp. The traffic is bad. I'm fighting to have holiday spirit. How goes your struggle for holiday vibes?
You know, working on it.
You feel like it's coming on?
Working on it.
All right.
Yeah. But I did like the first piece on our front page.
Look at you. The hard pivot.
Yeah.
I'm here for it.
I'm
here for it.
So we're going to talk on our front page. We're going to talk Syria. We're going to talk United C.E.O. assassination. And we're going to get to Trump. But Chris, you had flagged this amusing Atlantic piece on the only remaining online copy of Vogue's Asma al-Assad profile.
So this is a 2012 piece that was in the Atlantic about the extraordinary lengths to which Vogue magazine went to scrub the internet of the existence of a profile of the dictator's wife that
headline, A Rose in the Desert.
A Rose in the Desert. And of course, the piece was so infamous because it came out after Bashar al-Assad had started slaughtering his people. And it's a good to remember that there's a lot of things that the press has gotten wrong over time, but one of them that will never fade is how wrong the media was about Bashar al-Assad, or how wrong so many in the media were about Bashar al-Assad, because his wife was a fashion icon, because they were very good at, and he was, I forget where he went to school, but he was an ophthalmologist. He was
educated in the UK.
Yeah, and elite schools, and dressed well, and she was glamorous and beautiful. And look, dictators around the world have done. We can talk about Madame Chiang Kai-shek's wife. The many people for many decades have succeeded in charming the American press and using glamour and all of that stuff. But I got to tell you, this Vogue piece, and I re-up the Atlantic piece from 12 years ago, which is how long this was going on, which was reminding readers about the perfidy of Vogue and the coverage of these people.
The Atlantic piece is great because it notes, and I wouldn't really say the media got it wrong. This was a particular part of the media that was persuaded and bought by by the PR flacks who the Syrian government hired. And there was revulsion at the time. I mean, I remember having lived through it at what they did, and they took it down from the internet a few weeks after it went up. But the profile described the Assads as wildly democratic and Syria as the safest country in the Middle East, and nonetheless conceded that Assad Syria is, quote, not as secular as we might like. Yeah. So
I agree with you that this particular piece was not only bias, but corruption. But we're getting ready to,
by gullible people who didn't know anything
and didn't ask worthwhile questions. We're going to soon have confirmation hearings on Tulsi Gabbard. Do I recall that Nancy Pelosi went to visit Bashar al-Assad? Do I recall that correctly?
I'm not sure about that.
I believe she did. And the Assads cultivated this mystique, this thing that was obviously not true, right? It was obviously false, but their sort of reflexive anti-American, the right kind of anti-Americanism and their opposition and the way that they opposed Israel, the way that they did all of these things was very well designed to charm and entice Americans of elite status and peaceniks like Gabbard and others. And I just wanted to, as the youth would say, I just wanted to show the receipts. Yes, Nancy Pelosi did visit him in 2007 and did it as an affront to the Bush administration of the time. And so good riddance to Bashar al-Assad.
My favorite item that's been written since Assad fell was the Wall Street Journal piece where a reporter went inside his ransacked palace and reports on what he found. And so this is Jared Malson in the Wall Street Journal, and he writes, in Assad's abandoned office, his desk and floor were littered with books and papers, a history of the Russian military, a map of northeastern Syria, a biography of himself.
Yes, yes.
The strips of benzodiazepine anti-anxiety pills were in their packaging on the desk. I love that too. On one of the yellowed windows overlooking Damascus, someone had spray painted Mir Soul Hafez, a reference to Bashar's late father, Hafez al-Assad, who ruled Syria for some 3 decades before his son inherited power. The palace afforded a glimpse into the last days of a dictator who for more than a decade used torture, bombings, and chemical weapons in war to suppress a rebellion against him, which began during the Arab Spring protests in 2011. And it's just a really fun and sort of salacious read about everything that they saw inside his home.
The Onion headline was Bashar al-Assad to return to the practice of ophthalmology in Moscow.
Yeah. One thing that I didn't know but learned in this is that his brother was actually supposed to inherit the throne or, whatever, the dictatorship from the father. And then the brother was killed in a car accident. And that Assad had been sort of the quiet, studious, younger brother and ended up becoming who he was unexpectedly. So that was interesting in all the reading about this.
He's like the reverse version of what was Queen Elizabeth's father, was that?
Exactly. Yeah.
The reverse King's speech. And that's part of how Assad got so many breaks was that the profile of the guy who was, I didn't want to be a strong man. He's like Herbie the elf from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. He didn't want to be a dictator. He really wanted to be an ophthalmologist.
Should we talk about the CEO assassination? I have to admit, Chris, first item you put in here, I've just totally ignored this stuff about how attractive. I've ignored all of the lionization of him.
Well, you put in, or maybe it was producer Colin Chicola who put in Rachel Maddow connects assassination
That was
to
not
Trump.
me. I'm innocent.
And I will say this, the coverage has been pretty, so you have the one part, which is everybody in the news business, everybody loves a manhunt. Everybody loves this. So here's what Rachel Maddow said. The fact that he's a professed Unabomber fan is unsettling. I might even venture it's more unsettling that Donald Trump's reported choice to run the ATF is also a self-professed fan of the Unabomber. And just, this is, Colin's clip is about dragging everything back to Trumpism. But we talked last week about how many people online and also voices in the media were sympathetic to this young man. And now we know a lot more about him, but I couldn't resist including this piece from the London Daily Mail. Handsome, Ivy League educated from a well-heeled family. Oh, and did I mention the rippling six-pack? On paper, Luigi Mangione is the sort of man any sane young woman might dream of. There's a rather large problem, however. The smoldering Italian-American, which is how I refer to Colin, the smoldering Italian-American now stands charged with killing the CEO of United Healthcare, 50-year-old Brian Thompson in New York last Wednesday. But perhaps the internet's obsession with Mangione's appearance is a distraction from the fact that even taking his striking good looks out of the equation, his worldview clearly resonates with plenty of young people across the political spectrum. Those on the left have hailed the University of Pennsylvania graduate as a kind of anti-capitalist folk hero. I don't want to overstate how much support there actually is for this person. But the sympathetic here, I believe somebody has put up warrant signs in New York for other healthcare CEOs, calling seemingly for similar vigilantism. And again, it's a story that is captivating for the dramatic arc and his background and his fugitiveness and the fact that in pursuit of a McRib, I assume, he was brought to justice. But it's the trying to turn this guy into John Dillinger seems like a pretty far reach. And Kevin Williamson, the great Kevin Williamson, wrote a piece basically saying insurance is a financial instrument. It's not healthcare. It's a financial instrument that pays for healthcare. And if you don't understand that and somehow get tangled up about what health insurance actually is, then you are liable to misunderstand Mr. Mangione.
Couple things on this. The Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal all have different versions of the same piece, which is about his biography, the fact that his family was a wealthy Baltimore real estate / healthcare family. He attended a Tony Baltimore private school and the University of Pennsylvania, and then appears to have fallen out of contact with them over the past year, suffering from back pain and some kind of spinal injury.
And Reddit, I think he was also afflicted by Reddititis.
So what's interesting to me, and I would recommend the Post piece, it was written by Dan Diamond at the Post, who went to the same high school as Mangione and went out to Baltimore and reported the piece. And the Baltimore Banner, which is a local newspaper in Baltimore that has been all over this, reporting in detail about all of this. But what's interesting to me in all this is how much we still don't know. So much of how he was radicalized over the past year still, to me, seems to be totally unknown.
Yeah, I don't have a clear picture of what took him from Reddit radicalized to and why this specific issue. And it's quite the most straightforward answer is that a person who would do this is unwell and that it doesn't demand further explanation. But what I do wonder on that front is his manifesto will come out. It will be published.
It's out.
Oh,
It's
what's
out,
he say?
and it was
What's he say?
published on a Substack. So maybe we can link that too, and expresses fury at capitalism and the healthcare industry here. I'm going to drop it in right now, but it's ironically, for somebody whose family prospered so much in this country, it is a totally anti-capitalist tract.
Oh my God! Well, he'll be very popular in some circles with that. Then very popular. We had this conversation as a nation when the Unabomber's manifesto came out, and manifestos appear from time to time. And I always come back to the same thing, which is a person who would be sick enough to do what he did is probably not somebody with other valuable ideas.
All right, Chris, we have lots of Trump news and not a lot of Biden news because Biden and Harris have basically fallen off the map.
Disappeared.
So Trump appeared on Meet the Press with Kristen Welker in what I thought was a pretty unremarkable interview. But it did strike me that for all of the talk that we've been hearing about the rise of podcasts and right-wing media and this and that, the fact that Trump took the time to sit down with NBC News and Meet the Press after spending so much time with podcasters on the campaign trail is an indication that the mainstream media will remain relevant in his presidency because he cares about it.
And I also, yeah, I think that's the key part because he cares about it. He cares about status things. He cares about Time Magazine, which I don't even know if they publish anymore. I happened to see the Today Show today, and they were talking about who will Time Magazine's icon of the year be? Who will their person of the year be? And I thought, who could care? How could it possibly matter to anyone who was declared Time Magazine's person of the year? But I think that kind of stuff still matters to Trump. He's of that vintage.
Chris, you flagged the publication or news items about the publication of a DOJ Inspector General report published on yesterday. So we're recording Wednesday, published Tuesday. And CNN wrote it up. Trump's DOJ secretly obtained records of his FBI pick Kash Patel, lawmakers, staffers, and media in leak investigations. What is your take on this?
So we remember, I mean, we could go all the way back to the Woodrow Wilson administration and probably before that, but certainly since the Eric Holder Justice Department under the Obama administration got hardcore about prosecuting leaks. And that would have been, I don't know, that was second term Obama, I think. And rooting around in the files of the Associated Press and getting the phone records and doing all of this stuff. The world of technology or our technologies make it possible for the government to go after leakers. Now, in this case, there was a double problem because they were going after leakers in Congress. It's a little different when they're going after leakers inside the administration. But in this case, Kash Patel and company were going after leakers in Congress, which you could make an argument that they're violating. I mean, you not make an argument, but it could be said.
No, it's not. It wasn't Kash Patel going after them. It was them going after him.
I think so. The piece says the Justice Department secretly obtained phone records from 2 members of Congress and 43 staffers, including Kash Patel, President-elect Donald Trump's pick to head the eye.
Right. So at the time, Patel was working as an aide to Nunes. And so they obtained his emails and Google Voice accounts, as well as, I believe, 2 members of Congress. And the upshot of the report is that they did not follow the appropriate procedures. Patel actually sued over this and lost the lawsuit. But I guess in DOJ, there's a panel that you need to go to if you want to monitor the communications of reporters. And this was supposed to go up to then Attorney General Bill Barr's level and never did. So it struck me as another case in which law enforcement was abusing its authority and playing fast and loose. And also the IG report says it's a potential violation of executive authority because Congress can't perform its oversight duties if the executive branch is basically spying on it without following the appropriate, methods.
Okay, so forgive my misunderstanding, but the point holds, which is exactly what you say, that the idea of we're going to root out leaks and we're going to prosecute leaks to the media, we're going to find the leakers. As you go to find the leakers, you will also find the leakees. You will find the people who are reporters who are doing their jobs and trying to get the story. And do you recall if we've had anything in the Biden administration along these lines? And there may be something obvious that I'm forgetting about.
I'm not sure. I mean, this was a super interesting case under Trump because my understanding, and it is hard to read the IG report because it doesn't name people. And it wasn't totally clear to me about whether these were political appointees in the Justice Department doing this, but I believe it was Trump political appointees doing this to Republicans on the Hill. These guys on the Hill were doing their own investigations, and so it was a pretty complicated thing that happens, but it overall, I think, does not make the Justice Department look good.
It does not. And just a caution that it is a temptation that every administration has and a dangerous one and closely connected to press freedom. So hopefully, since Kash Patel has been a victim of this, if he does become the FBI director, that he will not engage, not condone these kinds of practices.
All right. So Chris, you flagged a tweet.
Well, so this is a clip from Donald Trump being named Honorary Patriot of the Year by Fox News. And the clip and the scene is wild. Trump is on stage being cheered on by the staff, the personnel of Fox News as the Patriot of the Year. And of course, if we were to flip it around, and if CNN had named Joe Biden, which maybe they did, I don't know. Certainly, they would be worth mockery if they had. But if CNN had given Joe Biden its humanitarian of the, what do they have? They have heroes. If they had named Joe Biden their hero of the year, what would Fox have said about it, right? Fox would have correctly lambasted CNN for doing it. And I flag it because it's of a piece of a very interesting moment with Fox and the Trump world, which is reinforced by a visit from the First Lady to Fox and Friends this week. Now, or the First Lady-elect, former and future First Lady. Now, that's when the future First Lady goes on a morning chat show, you expect a soft interview in which she's going to say what her initiatives might be or how she feels about winning or whatever else. Fox and Friends gave her a QVC moment, and they oohed and awed over the Christmas ornaments that she sells. So it was, you can buy these Christmas ornaments, and it's pretty weird. It's pretty weird. And that, of course, is of a piece with the next item, which is that the next former Fox News person to get a Trump cabinet or a Trump administration post is Kimberly Guilfoyle, former Fox News host, who in one of the most dizzying turns-about that I can recall, in the morning, and we're recording this on Wednesday, in the morning on Tuesday, her longtime fiance, Donald Trump Jr., appeared in public with another woman. And by the end of the day, Guilfoyle had been appointed ambassador to Greece. And it's weird and it's super incestuous.
Oh,
And
it's awesome. I mean, Don Jr. he dumped Kim Guilfoyle and then sent her across the world. That's like a power move.
it is perhaps in your company, it would be a power move. But of course, to be annoying, I will just point out these are government jobs and these are positions of trust and responsibility. And Greece isn't exactly nowhere, right? This is not Liechtenstein where you just get to have dinner parties. Greece is in a bumpy neighborhood. These are important, these are important considerations with a politically volatile Greece and all that stuff. And it's just, it's just a real woof kind of situation.
I was amused by it, but it is the sort of thing that would amuse me. And the new woman is 15 years younger.
15 years younger and
blonde.
Was
everything us aging brunettes sneer at.
And this is a person not formerly married to Gavin Newsom. But I all of those things about the weirdness of Fox and Trump, I include this. Matt Gaetz expected to become anchor on pro-Trump network following short-lived attorney general nomination. CNN national correspondent Kristen Holmes reported on Monday evening that Matt Gaetz was expected to join One America News Network as an anchor, citing an unnamed source familiar with the situation. So as Fox thinks about how to suck up to Donald Trump as much as they can, they're doing so with the fact that One America News and there's a couple of other off-brand Foxes, Real America Voice, and of course Newsmax, that don't have any compunction at all about this kind of stuff. So that as easy as it is and appropriate as it is to laugh at Fox for selling Melania Trump's earrings and giving Donald Trump awards, they're doing so knowing that there are people waiting in the wings who would decry Fox as reflexively anti-Trump. And that's certainly a big part of what drives what they're doing.
I thought when I saw this is a perfect job for Matt Gaetz.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I'm surprised he wants it, right? I'm surprised. I mean,
Oh, it's perfect job for him. It's like, I wasn't surprised.
I mean, it's kind of a grind and a relatively small audience. I don't know. Maybe he'll be able to tape a show, and then I figured that he would be. Don't you figure that he'll be running for governor? Don't you figure that he's going to be trying to get back into politics?
This is a great platform for him.
Heaven help Florida. Heaven help you, Florida.
Okay. In business news, Chris, we have Matea Gold, who was the managing editor of the Washington Post, fleeing the paper for the New York Times, which to me seemed expected and natural given that she appears to have been passed over for the top job at the Post. What say you?
Well, the Times, I found this piece very interesting because the Times is reveling in the Post's ongoing anguish, as is the Times want to do. The newsroom has been in turmoil, the Times writes, since Will Lewis, the company's chief executive, abruptly forced out the paper's top editor in June. Matt Murray, the former top editor of the Wall Street Journal, has led the newsroom on an interim basis. Since then, several journalists from the opinion section stepped down from their positions after Jeff Bezos, the paper's owner, decided shortly before the U.S. presidential election that the paper would not endorse a candidate for president, and goes on to say that other candidates include Cliff Levy, a former deputy managing editor of the Times, and now the deputy publisher of Wirecutter, which, of course, the Times likes writing this because they say, we even know that you're trying to poach, dear Washington Post, we even know that you're trying to poach our guy and take him down there. So I find this, Matea Gold seems like a pretty logical choice to lead the New York Times Washington bureau, but I was interested in this piece more than anything because of the rivalry between the two papers and the sort of pettiness of the coverage.
I mean, it's not much of a rivalry anymore. I think this is like David and Goliath at this point.
Yeah, but that doesn't stop the New York Times from enjoying dunking on them.
Well, they should. Okay, Chris, you flagged this piece, and I have to say I refuse to pay for this newsletter, so I could not read it and need you to walk me through the next bit.
This is from Oliver Darcy's Status. So today, as we record this, is the last New York Times column from Paul Krugman, who has been a stalwart of the Times editorial page since 2000, often in error, never in doubt. And he was a much bigger deal in sort of the Bush era. He was in the aughts and the early 2010s, sort of this very much into talking about the sort of Elizabeth Warrenian, Thomas Piketty, income inequality and all that jazz. So I was surprised to see that after 24 years that he was leaving the Times. And then I saw this piece from Oliver Darcy. Last Friday, Kathleen Kingsbury, the opinion editor at the New York Times, announced in a note to staffers that Paul Krugman was retiring as a columnist. The memo was as kind as it could be. It lauded Krugman for his authoritative voice, lively writing, and direct style. But it was still a fairly low-key way to say goodbye to a Times legend. Nobel laureate, true, and one of the most famous columnists in the world. There was no goodbye event in which Kingsbury and publisher A.G. Sulzberger toasted to Krugman's storied career. There was no splashy story placed by the Times Public Relations Department. And, Oliver Darcy. I was hoodwinked by Oliver Darcy because he does a cliffhanger right before you have to increase your subscription. Boo. But he says, I'm told in particular, Krugman and Kingsbury had fundamental disagreements over ellipsis. So pointing to a complaint over the process for approving Krugman's editorials and how that went. And if you want to pay $15 a month to read about what Paul Krugman didn't like about how the New York Times editorial page does its work, you should do that. But boo Oliver Darcy. Paragraph 5.
All right, Chris, that brings us to a judge's rejection of the sale of InfoWars to The Onion. And the AP notes that the judge rejected the auction sale of InfoWars to The Onion. He said the bidding process was flawed, essentially because it didn't sell for enough, such that the amount of money that families of the 2012 Sandy Hook elementary shooting weren't going to receive the enough money. The judge cited problems but no wrongdoing with the auction process and said he did not want another auction and left it up to the trustee who oversaw the auction to determine next steps.
So it wasn't enough money, is what
Yes.
the judge said.
Yes.
Well, maybe we will still get the Onion-owned InfoWars. My fingers are crossed. My fingers are crossed.
That brings us to our style section, where I was amused. So Sebastian Gorka is going into the administration as the senior director on the National Security Council for counterterrorism. And Michael Anton is going in as the director of policy planning. And reporting indicated that Anton, who served on the National Security Council in the first Trump administration, was set to go there, but said he didn't want to work with Gorka. And our favorite Twitter fashion poster, Derek Guy, says, tongue in cheek, but it's a really fun post. The Washington Post reports that Michael Anton and Sebastian Gorka had a falling out over who should receive credit for writing Trump's speeches. This is incorrect. In this thread, I will tell you the real reason why Anton dislikes Gorka. And he goes through Anton's history, which is well known, and people have written about it. Anton's super into fashion, and he was a poster on various men's fashion sites. And Derek Guy says, one can't assume Anton's stated reason for disliking Gorka is a real reason. I posit a different theory. Anton dislikes the way Gorka dresses. Surely you say no one can get this upset about clothes. Oh, but they can. You do not know my people. And he just ticks through all the ways that Gorka violates Anton's views of dressing. And starting with, and he hates white dress shirts. And he flags all these pictures in which Gorka is wearing white dress shirts.
Well, he hates white dress shirts with blazers, patterned blazers. And I gotta say, Michael Anton, the author of the infamous Flight 93 election, I'm not surprised that he's a stickler on menswear, but I had a new appreciation for him. His taste
he's like right about everything.
His taste is a little more narrow than mine, but I was impressed. And of course, it is true that Sebastian Gorka, Dr. Gorka, dresses terribly. And I was surprised at the degree of appreciation that I had for Anton's fashion sense.
Yeah, it's very good. Okay, Chris, you flagged the secret lives of group chats.
Well, mostly because I'm curious what you think about group chats. We have a group chat for Extant Wretches, which is one of my most active group chats. I've got a couple, and I wonder, and I think group chats, I've got one with my friends from West Virginia who we stay in touch that way. And it's mostly respected. There'll be generally flurries of activity. Sometimes I will be the instigator where a joke goes around or whatever, but it's a nice little thing. But a group chat can also be a burden. And I was wondering what your point of view on the group chat situation is.
I don't really have strong opinions. Like, nobody's obligated to reply, right?
Yeah, but it can be a lot. And you may be.
Oh, I put them on mute. So I put them on mute so that I don't get the notifications, because that I really can't stand when there's a flurry of activity and I'm getting all these notifications. That is a big no for me. But I don't mind their existence.
Well, they need good names. And what the Post does is invite a bunch of writers to talk about their own group chats and the stories that they tell and all of that. And it was kind of interesting. And it was a good piece, and it made me think about this stuff. One of the the vicissitudes of modern life?
I don't have any that I'm deeply enmeshed in, I must say.
Your family must have one.
Oh, yeah. But I'm probably the biggest participant in that, sending, kid photos.
All right. What about your winter arc?
Non-existent. I'm like the opposite. I just fall into like a deep depression.
The New York Times talks about, and this is something I certainly saw on social media, and by social
I
media,
did
I
not
mean,
see this till you posted, and I'm grateful for that.
which is the idea. So we used to hear women talk about getting beach body ready, and that that the period from basically the beginning of the new year until the spring, that you would get fit and toned up for the warm weather months and do all of that stuff. Well, now fitness gurus have stretched it out to the winter arc, which begins in October and is supposed to carry you to April. And that's where you focus on going to the gym, eating right, and doing all of that stuff. And I think this is a seasonal question based on which season do you enjoy the most. And I guess it would make sense that for outdoorsy people who like to do all sorts of stuff, that they would flip it. But, I look at it the other way, which is, for me, my birthday's in mid-November. From about, we'll call it McRib season, from then until into January. Jessica's birthday is the 3rd of January. So from November to mid-January, that's like when you're supposed to enjoy it, right? You're supposed to be good the rest of the time, so that at Thanksgiving and Christmas and holiday time and do all those things, that you can enjoy time with your family and be cozied up and do all that stuff. That seems to make more sense to me, but what do I know?
I'm 100% not participating in this.
You're not on an arc?
No. And I don't understand. I mean, get bikini ready. I'm like thinking about that 3 days before I go to the beach.
Well, you generally take good care of yourself. So you're not like,
Look at the people. The people pictured in this article are in so much better shape than I am. It's amazing.
What's because they're
They
arcing?
look fabulous.
They're arced. They're on an arc. They're
Yeah.
2 by 2. They've gone
They
on the
look
arc.
glowing and fab.
Seems
and
like, but have you
photographing their healthy meals.
but have you ever tried stuffing? Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
So good.
Okay, Chris, that brings us to our obsessions of the week. And mine was a fascinating piece in the Atlantic about a data falsification scandal that has bedeviled Harvard Business School for years, surrounding a professor there named Francesca Gino or Gino. I'm not actually sure how it's pronounced. And I was familiar with this because this was transpiring around the time that the Claudine Gay stuff happened with her plagiarism. And so this was all familiar to me. And this tells the story of one of Gino or Gino's co-authors on several papers. So essentially, Gino was implicated, but she'd co-authored over 100 studies with other business school professors. And one of them set about to tease out, well, which of these do we need to retract? And ended up finding that many of the papers she had authored with the Harvard Business School professor didn't hold up, and couldn't find records for the studies that were conducted, and so on and so forth. And the reporter ends up suspecting that this woman, her name is Juliana Schroeder, began to conduct this study because she knew she herself had also engaged in the falsification, and she believed that ratting herself out would protect her if she looked like she was blowing the whistle, rather than sort of waiting to be found out. And it's just a fascinating story about, what sort of comes up is the sort of lack of seriousness in academia, and then particularly in business schools where, I think things are a little bit less serious, but we've seen it all over academia over the past several years.
It was a very interesting piece, a very interesting piece. It was worthy of being obsessed over.
Yes, it's a great piece.
A demographer by inclination,
Can I
was
just
fat.
note one other thing
Yeah.
about this piece that struck me?
Anything.
Is we never really got a deep dive like this from the mainstream media about the Claudine Gay plagiarism. And hey, how exactly did somebody who engaged in plagiarism like this become the president of Harvard? And how is she still a tenured professor there?
Mm-hmm.
And so that struck me as well.
Striking indeed. My obsession is a demographer's obsession, and the Washington Post and its Department of Data, Andrew Van Dorn, looking at census data on the ethnicities of white Americans, which is something that if you grew up where I grew up was a matter of much discussion because, of course, there were English and German and Scots-Irish and Irish, but also Italians, Slovaks, Slovenes, Ukrainians, Russians, Polish, and Finns, on and on and on. The industrial Midwest is a real stew of different white ethnic groups. And the interesting part about this to me is not what they're interested in. They're interested in pointing out that people of English ancestry are larger in number than people of German ancestry, and previously German ancestry was considered to be the largest single white ethnic group. Well, I will only say these are all self-reported data, and what is my ancestry? Yes, I definitely have German ancestry. My last name, Steyerwald, centuries ago was Steigerwald, and that's true. That's about all the German ancestry I have. Most of my ancestry is Scots-Irish, English, Welsh, and on my mother's side, very Irish. And how would I answer a census? What would be the way in which I would answer a census form that says, what is person number one's race? White, black, African-American, what is a person's race? And in the 2020 census, white. You can check white, and then you print, for example, German, Irish, English, Italian, Lebanese, Egyptian, etc. And what would I fill in there? Not Egyptian, but certainly the first three. I could say all of the first three, a little dash of some Scandinavian in there, probably just Anglo-Saxon marauders. But which noun I would put in that line would be just a question of how I saw myself and what my state of mind was. I also imagine that changing attitudes about ethnicity for whites probably has something to do with the rise of genetic testing and the millions of Americans who now have seen maps or typologies of their ancestry, and the people who thought they were this and found out they were that probably has some effect here. But this is very subjective, right? It's very subjective. Now, once you get past that part, you get to the maps, and the maps are really interesting. And who people are is interesting. Who people think they are is really, really interesting. And the Post goes through with some very, very useful, some neat maps about where people believe that they're from, believe what their ancestry is. In the little pocket of Italian Americans in the New York metro area that predominate, the Germans and Norwegians, the Germans that populate Pennsylvania, Michigan, the upper Midwest, and out, the English that dominate in the South, and all of that stuff, I find very interesting. And of course, deeply connected to the politics for me, connected to the politics of our own time, because of course, the threads if you tug very gently on our current politics, you find a lot more in there. And I pored over this entry spent a lot of time with it. It was certainly an afternoon's obsession for me.
Chris, that brings us to my favorite time of the week, which is reader mail. And we have a note from Leland Hutchinson in Chicago, who writes, "Let me join the thousands of listeners who are writing to point out that Contra Brother Steyerwalt, John Tower, was in fact a Republican elected in 1961 to the Senate in the aftermath of LBJ's elevation to the vice presidency. Tower's Sec of Defense nomination wasn't done in by Democrats alone. Some of his GOP colleagues said no, too, perhaps having seen too much too recently. Does it speak well of the GOP that they are willing to clobber their own? Maybe, but only a loser would think there is much virtue in it. Having said that, let me speak up for the often maligned Senator Susan Collins, who's sometimes missing when it doesn't matter, but is usually there when it does. See her wonderful speech in support of Brett Kavanaugh."
Well, yes, apologies. John Tower was a Democrat early in his life, but by the time he was in the Senate, he had switched to the Republican Party, like a lot of people in Texas and in the South. So I regret the error. As for it being a loser move to oppose your own party, the Senate's job is to be the Senate. And we have a brain dead partisanship in the United States that holds that the purpose of the Senate is to either ratify the choices of a president of their own party or oppose all of the choices of a president of the opposite party. That diminishes the power of the Senate. One of the reasons we have a bad politics today is that both houses of Congress tend to fail to pursue their own agendas and pursue their own power and have devolved their power to the other branches. That's one of the reasons we have so many populist uprisings and outrages in the United States, is that the Congress doesn't do its job of representing. The job of the Senate is to represent the states and the interests of the states. And maybe I will lean on Brother Jonah Goldberg, who makes the point. A president is elected with a mandate, and so is every member of the Senate. And the mandate is to do their job, right? And when those jobs are at odds, they should do that. And there's nothing wrong with principled disagreement on various points. And I suspect that on Tulsi Gabbard, Pete Hegseth, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., there will be opposition. Will it be sufficient? I think in Gabbard's case, I would be very surprised that if Tom Cotton, the new chairman of the Senate Intel Committee, goes along with Tulsi Gabbard to be the keeper of the nation's secrets.
Chris, do you want to bet $25 on that?
How about steak lunch?
Okay. Done.
So you say she's confirmed.
I do.
Okay, I'll take that action, because either way, I get to eat a steak.
I say, what I'm saying is that Cotton votes yes on Gabbard, and that he meant it when he tweeted that the president's nominees would be confirmed.
Well, so that's a more narrow bet. Will Cotton support her?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll still take it. I think
Okay.
I think it's a worse bet for me, but again, the consequences either way are that I get to enjoy a delicious steak lunch with you, which is a treat in its own. But I do think that the Senate should be the Senate, and that there should be deference to the executive broadly on the question of the executive getting his appointees. But there's nothing wrong with fighting.
Chris, that brings us to your favorite time of the week, where I am forced to say something nice. Go ahead, you first. I have a great piece for this, so I'm excited.
I don't mean for all of my favorite items to be suggested by my sons, but here we are, and yet here we are again. A great obituary in the New York Times. Shuntaro Tanikawa, popular poet and translator of Peanuts, dies at 92. A perennial frontrunner for the Nobel Prize in Literature, he was a revered figure in Japan, not just in literary circles, but also among casual readers. And I obviously had no idea about this famous Japanese poet, or that the very popular Peanuts comic strip, as it appeared in Japan and Japanese newspapers, was that he translated it. The line says, Japan's most popular poet for more than half a century, whose stark and whimsical poems, blending humor with melancholy, made him kind of an everyman philosopher, ideally suited to translating the Peanuts comic strip and Mother Goose rhymes into Japanese, died on November 13th in Tokyo. He was 92. Fascinating read.
That's funny because my favorite is also a New York Times obituary, and it is about Shalom Nagar, the reluctant executioner of Adolf Eichmann.
Ooh.
And it is a fantastic piece about how this happened after Eichmann was picked up by the Mossad in Argentina and taken to Jerusalem, where the Israelis took extraordinary measures to ensure that he wasn't murdered. And Nagar, who died this week, recounted, "Before I gave him his meal, I had to taste it myself. If I didn't drop dead after 2 minutes, the duty officer allowed the plate into his cell. Of all the guards," Mr. Nagar said, "he was the only one who didn't want the job of hangman. The head warden considered him ideal," he said, "because he was a decorated soldier and had been an orphan in Yemen during World War II, untouched by the Holocaust. So they also made a lot of efforts to keep direct victims, or those who had family members who perished in the Holocaust, away from Eichmann." Mr. Nagar told the warden that he should find someone else to do the job, he recalled. "Then he took me and several other guards and showed us footage of how the Nazis took innocent children and tore them to pieces," he continued. "I was so shaken that I agreed to do whatever had to be done."
Wow.
It's a great piece.
That's even more riveting than Peanuts.
It's a great piece. That is all the time we have for the news about the news. If you have a story that you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com. That's wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com. And sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcasts.com. This has been Ink-Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced by Colin Chicola. Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.